I was standing in my bedroom, smoothing down my navy blue dress for the 100th time, when my phone buzzed. The dress I'd bought 3 months ago. The one I'd saved for by skipping lunches at work. The same dress I'd tried on 5 different times, wanting to look perfect for my daughter's wedding day. Emma's name lit up the screen. My heart fluttered with excitement. Maybe she was calling to thank me again for helping pay for the venue, or to tell me how nervous and happy she was. Maybe she wanted to share one last mother-daughter moment before walking down the aisle. But it wasn't a call. It was a text message. "I don't want you at my wedding." I read it once, then twice, then a third time, my hands starting to shake. The words didn't change. They sat there on my screen like a slap across the face, cold and final. I sank onto the edge of my bed, the gift box beside me, the antique jewelry box I'd found at the estate sale, the one that reminded me of the music box Emma had loved as a child. I'd spent weeks restoring it, polishing every detail until it gleamed. My mind raced back to everything. The late-night shifts I'd worked to help pay for this wedding. The joy in her voice when she'd first told me about Marcus. The hours we'd spent looking at venues and flowers and dresses. Had I misunderstood something? Had I done something wrong? Before continuing, if this story is touching your heart, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Don't forget to ring the notification bell, because every day I'm bringing you stories of women who turn their deepest pain into a new good way of living their lives. The wedding was supposed to start into hours, and my own daughter didn't want me there. How did I get to this moment? How did the daughter I raised, the one I sacrificed everything for, become someone who could send such a cruel message? 15 years ago, when Emma was 13 and my world collapsed with her father's sudden heart attack, I made a promise to myself. She would never feel the void I felt. She would have everything I couldn't give her before: the college education, the opportunities, the security. I remember those first months after the funeral, when the insurance money ran out and the bills kept coming. Emma would sit at our small kitchen table doing homework while I prepared for my night shift. At the diner, the house felt too quiet without his laughter, too empty without his presence warming every corner. I took on extra shifts wherever I could find them, cleaning offices before dawn, waitressing until midnight, weekend shifts at the grocery store. My hands became permanently rough from industrial soap. My feet ached in ways I never knew possible. But Emma never went without. When she was 16, she needed a dress for homecoming. Not just any dress. She wanted the one from the boutique downtown. The one that cost more than I made in a week. I worked double shifts for a month, lived on crackers and soup, just to see her face light up when I handed her the shopping bag. She was beautiful that night, radiant. She hugged me so tight and whispered thank you, and I thought my heart might burst with pride and love. Those were the moments that made everything worth it. When she graduated valedictorian and I sat in the 3rd row, clapping until my palms stung. When she called me crying from her first week at university, homesick and overwhelmed, and I drove for hours just to bring her favorite cookies and a hug. I put myself through nursing school while working full-time, taking classes at night so I could earn better money to support her dreams. There were nights I fell asleep over textbooks, coffee growing cold beside me. But I graduated the same spring she finished her degree in business. 4 years. It was just us. We talked every day, shared everything. She would come home for holidays and we'd cook together in my small kitchen, laughing at old family stories, planning her future. Then she met Marcus at her company's Christmas party last year. He was everything I wasn't: polished, wealthy, confident in a way that came from never having to worry about money. When she first brought him home, I tried so hard to make a good impression. I bought new curtains, cooked her favorite meal, wore my best dress. But I could see it in his eyes. The way he looked around our modest living room, taking in the second-hand furniture and faded wallpaper. The polite but distant smile when I offered him coffee in my mismatched mugs. Emma saw it too, and something shifted in her that day. The phone calls became shorter, the visits less frequent. When she did come home, she seemed restless, embarrassed by things that had never bothered her before. The crack in the bathroom tile I couldn't afford to fix. The way I pronounced certain words, dropping letters the way people did in our neighborhood. When Marcus proposed, I cried with joy. When they started planning the wedding, I offered to help pay for it. Emma hesitated at first, but the venue they wanted was expensive, the catering costs astronomical. I liquidated my small savings account, took a loan against my car, picked up extra shifts until I was working 7 days a week. $6,500. That's what I contributed to their dream wedding. Money that represented years of careful saving, future security I was giving up for her happiness. But as the planning continued, I felt myself being gradually pushed to the edges. The dress shopping trips I wasn't invited to, the menu tastings where there was supposedly no room for me, the bridal shower at Marcus's family's country club, where I was told the dress code was cocktail attire, code for don't come if you can't afford to fit in. Emma's new friends, especially Sarah, made their feelings about me clear with raised eyebrows and whispered comments they thought I couldn't hear. The working-class mother who didn't understand wine pairings or destination honeymoons. I started to see myself through their eyes. My calloused hands, my discount store dresses, my simple way of speaking. I was the embarrassing mother from the wrong side of town, a reminder of where Emma came from and what she was trying to escape. Still, I never imagined this. Even as the distance grew between us, even as I felt less and less welcome in her new world, I believed that on her wedding day, she would want me there. That when it mattered most, love would win over appearances. I was wrong. Now I sat on my bed, looking at that cruel text message, understanding finally what I had become to my daughter. Not the woman who raised her, loved her, sacrificed for her. Just an embarrassment she needed to hide away. That morning, I sat on my bed holding the devastating text message, and I made the hardest decision of my life. I wasn't going to call her. I wasn't going to plead or cry or ask why. I was simply going to disappear. I took off the navy dress, folded it carefully, and put it away. I packed the restored jewelry box back into its wrapping. Then I turned off my phone. For 3 days, I didn't answer calls or texts. When I finally looked, there were dozens of messages. Some from Emma, growing increasingly frantic. Where are you? People are asking about you. This is embarrassing. Others from her new friends. Probably Sarah's doing. Your mother is causing drama by not showing up. This is Emma's day. Not hers. Not one asked if I was okay. Not one wondered if I was hurt. That's when I knew I had to change everything. Within a month, I found a small one-bedroom apartment across town. It was nothing fancy, just a clean space with big windows and no memories attached. I gave my landlord notice on the house where Emma grew up. The house filled with photos of birthday parties and Christmas mornings and bedtime stories. Mrs. Henderson from next door helped me pack. She was the only person who seemed to understand why I was leaving everything behind. Sometimes, dear, she said, wrapping my dishes in newspaper, you have to save yourself first. That girl of yours, she's forgotten who raised her to be decent. Maybe she needs to remember what life feels like without you in it. I started over at 58. got a part-time job at a small community center, teaching basic computer skills to other women my age who'd been left behind by a world that moved too fast. The pay was less than nursing, but for the first time in decades, I felt valuable in a way that had nothing to do with what I could sacrifice for someone else. It was at the community center that I met David. He was there volunteering, teaching woodworking classes to seniors. Soft-spoken man with gentle hands and laugh lines around his eyes. His wife had died of cancer 3 years earlier, and like me, he was learning how to be alone with himself again. We started with coffee after classes, simple conversations about books we'd read, places we'd like to visit someday. He never rushed me, never pushed for more than I was ready to give. When I finally told him about Emma, about that text message, he just listened and then said, "A woman who raised a daughter to adulthood deserves better than that." Meanwhile, Emma's perfect new life was unraveling, though I wouldn't learn the details until much later. The wedding had gone ahead without me, of course. Beautiful ceremony, everyone said. Marcus looked handsome in his expensive suit. Emma was radiant in her designer dress. But even on her wedding day, I heard through Mrs. Henderson's network of neighborhood gossip, Emma kept checking her phone, looking for me in the crowd. The honeymoon was a lavish trip to Europe. Marcus's choice, Marcus's planning, Marcus's control over every detail. When they returned, he suggested they combine their finances completely. "No more yours and mine," he told Emma. "We're married now. Everything should be shared." It made sense to her. He was successful, charming, appeared to have so much more experience with money than she did. She closed her individual accounts and put everything into joint savings and checking. Every penny of her salary, every cent she'd saved over the years, the small inheritance her father had left her, all of it went into accounts that required both their signatures. At first, it felt romantic. They were truly united, truly partners. Marcus handled the bills, the investments, the financial planning. Emma focused on her career, trusting that her husband was building their future together. But slowly, things began to change. Marcus started questioning her purchases, not just large ones, but everything. A coffee with co-workers became wasteful spending. New clothes for work became unnecessary expenses. He set up a household budget that gave her a small allowance for personal expenses, like she was a child asking for pocket money. When Emma tried to access their online banking to check their savings, she found he'd changed all the passwords. "I handle the money, remember?" he said when she asked. "You don't need to worry about those details. Trust me." Before we continue, make sure to like this video and subscribe. With your support, we can keep bringing more stories from powerful women that touch the heart of all of us. The isolation happened gradually. Marcus had opinions about Emma's friends. They were too loud, too shallow. Bad influences on a married woman. He preferred they spend evenings at home together, just the two of them. When co-workers invited Emma for after-work drinks, Marcus would call repeatedly until she made excuses and left early. Even Sarah, Emma's supposed best friend, began to fade from the picture when Marcus made it clear he found her company tiresome. Emma began to understand what loneliness felt like in a way she never had before. She thought about calling me dozens of times, but pride held her back. How could she admit that her perfect marriage was becoming a prison? How could she tell me that the mother she'd been ashamed of might have been right about Marcus all along? Meanwhile, I was discovering what it meant to build a life around my own happiness instead of someone else's needs. David and I married in a simple ceremony at the community center, surrounded by the friends we'd made there. No fancy venue, no expensive dress, No stress about impressing people who didn't really care about us. Just to people who'd found each other after learning the hard way. That love shouldn't cost you your dignity. Mrs. Henderson was my maid of honor. She wore her best church dress and cried happy tears during our vows. This is what love looks like, she whispered to me afterward. Respect, kindness, someone who thinks you're enough exactly as you are. We moved into David's small house across town, a place that smelled like wood shavings and fresh coffee, where every room had windows that let in morning light. I kept working at the community center, helping women who reminded me of myself learn that it was never too late to start over. For 18 months, I lived in peace. I slept through the night without worrying about someone else's problems. I ate meals I chose, watched movies I enjoyed, spent money on things that made me happy without guilt or justification. I learned to use a smartphone, took a painting class, even started a small garden behind David's house. Sometimes I wondered about Emma. Mrs. Henderson would mention seeing her at the grocery store, always looking tired, always alone. That husband of hers keeps her on a short leash, she told me once. Girl looks like a ghost of herself. But I pushed those thoughts away. Emma had made her choice when she sent that text message. She'd chosen appearances over love, status over family. I couldn't save someone who didn't want to be saved, and I couldn't sacrifice my newfound peace for someone who'd thrown away my sacrifices so carelessly. Then, on a Tuesday morning in October, almost 2 years after the wedding, everything changed. Marcus disappeared overnight, not just from Toronto, from the country entirely. He'd been running an elaborate investment scam, using the trust and social connections Emma had helped him build. Friends, co-workers, distant family members. He'd convinced dozens of people to invest their savings in what he claimed was a revolutionary tech startup. Emma's own mother-in-law lost her entire retirement fund to his lies. The FBI was looking for him. The Canadian authorities were looking for him. But Marcus was gone, vanished like smoke, and he'd taken everything with him. Not just the stolen investment money, every penny in the joint accounts he and Emma had shared. Her savings, her salary, her father's inheritance. Even the funds from selling the engagement ring he'd insisted she upgrade. Emma lost her apartment when she couldn't make rent. Lost her car when the payments bounced. Lost her job when the scandal broke and her company decided she was too much of a liability to keep on staff. She had nothing left. Nothing except the knowledge that everyone in her life knew she'd been married to a criminal. That she'd been either complicit or incredibly naive. That's when she decided to find me. I was arranging flowers at the community center when Mrs. Henderson called me. Her voice was tight with concern. "She's here, dear. You're Emma. She's been sitting in that old beat-up Honda outside my house for the past hour, just staring at where your house used to be." My hands stilled on the chrysanthemums. 2 years. 2 years of building a new life, of learning to sleep peacefully, of discovering who I was when I wasn't sacrificing myself for someone else's happiness. And now she was back. "What do you want me to do?" Mrs. Henderson asked gently. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of maternal worry settling on my shoulders like an old coat I'd forgotten I owned. But this time, something was different. This time, I had a choice. "Give her my work address," I said finally. "Tell her if she wants to talk. She can find me at the community center cafe tomorrow at 2 o'clock. The next day, I arrived early and chose a table by the window, where the afternoon light would soften the inevitable tears. I ordered coffee and waited, my hands surprisingly steady around the warm mug. She walked in looking like a stranger, wearing my daughter's face. Emma had always been tall and confident, carrying herself with the kind of grace that came from never doubting you belonged wherever you were. But the woman who hesitated in the doorway looked smaller somehow, her shoulders curved inward, her expensive clothes hanging loose on a frame that had clearly lost weight. It couldn't afford to lose. Her hair, once professionally styled and golden, hung limp and untreated at her shoulders. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and when she spotted me, her entire face crumpled for just a moment before she composed herself. She walked to my table on unsteady legs, and for a heartbeat, I saw her as she'd been at 5 years old, coming to me with a scraped knee and absolute faith that I could make everything better. "Hi," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hello, Emma." She sat down across from me, her hands shaking as she folded them on the table. Up close, I could see the full extent of what the past 2 years had done to her. The fine lines around her eyes, the way her wedding ring was gone but had left a pale band on her finger, the quiet desperation she was trying so hard to hide. I don't know how to start," she said. "Then don't start with words," I replied quietly. "Start with the truth." The tears came then, sudden and ugly and full of the kind of pain that has no dignity. She cried like she was 5 years old again, with her whole body gasping for breath between sobs. "I'm so sorry," she choked out. "I'm so sorry. I know I don't deserve. I know you probably hate me, but I didn't know where else to go." I watched her fall apart and felt my heart breaking into different directions, part of it aching for my child in pain, part of it staying carefully protected behind the walls I'd built to survive her abandonment. "Tell me what happened," I said. Through tears and broken sentences, the whole story came out. Marcus's deception, the stolen money, the FBI investigation, the way everyone she'd thought were friends had disappeared the moment scandal touched her life. She'd lost her job, her apartment, her car. She was staying in a women's shelter, working part-time at a grocery store, trying to rebuild from nothing. "Sarah won't even return my calls," she said bitterly. "Turns out she was only my friend when I had something she wanted. And Marcus. God, I was so stupid. You tried to warn me, didn't you? With your questions about his job, about why he never talked about his family. But I thought you were just being. I thought you were jealous." "Jealous of what?" "Of my life, my success, my marriage to someone sophisticated." She wiped her nose with a paper napkin, leaving her face blotchy and raw. "I thought you resented that I'd made something of myself beyond what you could give me." The words hung between us like smoke. I could see now what had happened, how my daughter had convinced herself that moving beyond me meant rejecting everything I represented, how she'd mistaken my working-class background for something shameful instead of something that had required strength. "Is that why you didn't want me at your wedding?" I asked. She nodded miserably. "Sarah kept saying, she said having you there would make me look poor? Common," she whispered. "She said Marcus's family would judge me if they saw where I came from, that it would hurt my chances of fitting into their social circle." I leaned back in my chair, studying this broken woman who had once been my confident, loving daughter. "And what did you think?" "I thought she was right," Emma said, the words coming out like a confession. "I was ashamed, not of you, exactly, but of being your daughter, of coming from that little house with the cracked bathroom tile and the second-hand furniture. I wanted to be someone else, someone who deserved Marcus and his world." The honesty was like a slap, even though I'd suspected as much. To hear it said out loud, to see the shame in her eyes as she admitted it, made something inside me go very still and quiet. "And now," I asked, Now I know that his world was built on lies and stolen money. Now I know that Sarah was never really my friend, just someone who wanted to control me. Now I know that she stopped struggling with words, that the only real love I ever had in my life, I threw away because I was too proud and too stupid to see its value. She reached across the table then, her fingers barely touching the back of my hand. "I need you," she whispered. "I don't have anyone else. I know I don't deserve your help. I know I hurt you in ways I can never take back. But please, I'm drowning here." I looked at her hand on mine, still soft, still manicured despite everything, still my daughter's hand. For a moment, every maternal instinct I'd ever had roared to life, demanding that I pull her into my arms, take her home, fix everything the way I always had. But then I thought about David, waiting for me at home, with dinner warming in the oven and gentle questions about my day. I thought about the peaceful mornings in my garden, the satisfaction of my work at the center, the way I'd finally learned to sleep without worrying about someone else's problems. I thought about that text message, "I don't want you at my wedding." Slowly, gently, I moved my hand away from hers. "I'm glad you're safe," I said. "I'm glad you're alive and working and trying to rebuild. But I can't be your solution, Emma." Her face went white. "What do you mean?" "I mean that for 2 years, I've been learning how to be someone other than your mother. I've been discovering who I am when I'm not sacrificing everything for your happiness. And I've found a peace. But I'm your daughter," she said, as if that trumped everything. "You were my daughter," I corrected quietly, "until you decided you didn't want me to be your mother. You can't unmake that choice just because your life fell apart." She stared at me like I'd struck her. "You're punishing me." "No," I said, and was surprised to find I meant it. "I'm protecting myself. There's a difference." The silence stretched between us, heavy with 28 years of love and sacrifice and disappointment. Finally, Emma spoke in a voice so small I almost couldn't hear it. "So this is it. You're just done with me?" I looked at my daughter, this stranger who wore her face, and felt something inside me let go. Not love. The love would always be there, like a scar that aches in bad weather. But the need to save her, to fix her, to sacrifice myself for her happiness, that was finally, mercifully gone. "I forgive you," I said, "but I can't forget. And I can't go back to being the woman who would give up everything for a daughter, who was ashamed of her." Emma sat there for another few minutes, crying quietly into her hands. Then she stood up on shaking legs, gathering what was left of her dignity around her like armor. "I hope someday you can find it in your heart to give me another chance," she said. I watched her walk away, my daughter who was no longer my daughter, and felt something I hadn't expected: relief. The hardest part was over. Now I could go home to David and my garden and my new life, and finally stop looking over my shoulder for the next crisis to steal my peace. That evening, David found me in the garden behind our house, pulling weeds with more intensity than they deserved. "How did it go?" he asked quietly, settling onto the small bench he'd built last spring. I sat back on my heels, dirt under my fingernails, and looked at the man who'd taught me that love didn't require sacrifice. "It's over," I said simply. He nodded, understanding everything in those 2 words. "Are you okay?" I considered the question seriously. Was I okay? My daughter, my only child, the person I'd poured 28 years of love and sacrifice into, was now truly gone from my life. Not dead, but lost to me in a way that felt final. And yet, sitting in my garden with soil between my fingers and the evening light warm on my face, I realized I was more than okay. I was free. The months that followed brought news through Mrs. Henderson's reliable network. Emma had found a small apartment in a different part of the city, working two part-time jobs to make ends meet. She'd started therapy, Mrs. Henderson reported, and was slowly building a life that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or support. I was glad to hear it. Despite everything, despite the text message and the years of feeling ashamed of me, I wanted her to be okay. I wanted her to learn what I'd learned, that you could build a life on your own strength. That happiness didn't require someone else's sacrifices, but I also knew that her healing journey was hers to take alone. 6 months later, I received a letter, not an email or a text, but an actual handwritten letter in Emma's careful script. I almost threw it away unopened, but David convinced me to read it. "You don't have to respond," he said, "but maybe you need to know what she has to say." The letter was 3 pages long, filled with apologies and explanations and the kind of self-reflection that only comes from hitting rock bottom. She wrote about therapy, about finally understanding how her shame about our working-class background had poisoned her perspective. She wrote about Marcus and how his manipulation had isolated her from everyone who'd ever genuinely cared about her. But the part that stayed with me was at the end. I understand now. That love isn't about what someone can do for you. It's about who chooses to stay when you have nothing left to offer. You stayed for 28 years, and I threw it away for appearances. I don't expect your forgiveness, and I don't expect another chance. I just want you to know that I finally understand what I lost. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my desk drawer. Then I went about my day, tending my garden, preparing dinner for David, getting ready for another day at the community center where women came to learn that it was never too late to start over. A year passed, then another. Emma sent a card on my 60th birthday, not asking for a response, just acknowledging the day. She sent another when David and I celebrated our 2nd wedding anniversary. Simple cards with simple messages. "Thinking of you today. Hope you're well." I never responded, not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation. I had learned the difference. Mrs. Henderson told me that Emma had gotten a promotion at work, that she'd started volunteering at the women's shelter where she'd once stayed, that she seemed different somehow, quieter, more thoughtful, less focused on impressing others. I was proud of her for that, but pride didn't mean I was willing to rebuild what she'd destroyed. One evening, as David and I sat on our front porch watching the sunset, he asked me something I hadn't expected. "Do you ever regret it? Walking away from her?" I thought about it for a long time, watching the sky turn from gold to deep purple. "I regret that it was necessary," I said finally. "I regret that she couldn't love me as I was. But I don't regret choosing myself for once in my life." He reached over and took my hand, his fingers warm and steady against mine. "You taught her something important, even if she learned it too late to save your relationship." "What's that?" "That actions have consequences. That love isn't unconditional when it's taken for granted. That sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones we've loved the most." I squeezed his hand, thinking about all the women I worked with at the community center. Women who'd spent decades sacrificing themselves for children, husbands, parents who never appreciated what they were given. Women who thought self-care was selfish, who believed their worth was measured only by what they could give to others. "Maybe that's the real lesson," I said. "Not that we should stop loving, but that we should stop setting ourselves on fire to keep other people warm." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I thought about Emma one last time. I hoped she was happy. I hoped she'd learned to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than need. I hoped she'd found peace with the choices she'd made and the consequences that followed. But mostly, I hoped she'd learned what I'd finally learned at 58 years old. That the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself. Some stories don't end with reconciliation. Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go, and the greatest victory is walking away with your dignity intact. I had both now, and that was enough. If this story moved you, click on the next video that's appearing on the screen now. I'm sure you'll be surprised by this new emotional and heartbreaking story I have right here to tell you.